Thomas, a man living on his own in a large house, starts receiving letters by a mysterious man called Larry Brickender, someone who knows Thomas by name even though they had never met before. Larry, saying that he's a lonely man, quickly starts asking very personal questions, urging Thomas to tell him what security system he uses for his home, when the nature of the letters become more and more bizarre. Hi folks, I'm R, your narrator. Before we start, make sure to lock your doors and windows and definitely do not respond to a stranger called Larry, asking you very personal questions about your daily routine. Keep in mind that this video will have spoilers, and with that said, let's begin. Thomas suddenly wakes up to the hard knocks on his door in the middle of the night, concerning him to who it might be. Walking through his dimly lit and large house, he goes downstairs and finds a note left for him in front of his door, with someone seemingly passing it through the door gap. The letter starts by addressing Thomas by his name, written by someone Thomas doesn't recognize, someone who knows Thomas by name under mysterious circumstances. The note, written by someone called Larry Brickender, explains that he wants to find someone to talk to, as he's been lonely due to the recent circumstances. Larry has been leaving notes door to door for weeks, finally stumbling upon Thomas's house, someone he knows by name. Larry continues on to say that he likes to keep in contact through letters and have a pen pal, as he's had some before and it proved to be very fun. He urges Thomas to open up and share his hobbies and interests just to get to know each other a little bit better. Thomas, being someone who has been finding it slightly difficult to cope with the recent events and not being able to visit his family, dismisses the fact that the stranger knows him by name and decides to write back to him. Thomas subsequently goes to his office and chooses between two ways of replying to Larry. One way is showing interest in Larry and asking about him, and the other is Thomas talking about himself and revealing too much information. The first letter asks why Larry has been lonely, displaying interest and fondness of getting to know him. But in the second one, Thomas talks about his own interests and hobbies and confronts Larry to not write him at such late hours. Deciding to go with the first one, being more considerate and gentle, he puts the letter away and plans to mail it tomorrow, seemingly knowing Larry's address from the envelope, including the sender's details. As next night commences and Thomas heads to bed, he's yet again awakened by loud knocks on his door. Going down to check who's knocking this late at night, he finds another note from Larry, who doesn't seem to have the concept of nighttime respect and disturbance. Larry shares in his note that his favorite color is blue and that he likes cats. He then continues that he enjoys reading and writing and is glad to have found someone like Thomas who has many things in common together. Larry then explains that he's not comfortable unveiling why he's been lonely and ends the letter by urging Thomas to respond to him and speak more of himself. As Thomas goes back to his office to respond accordingly, he's left with two possible choices, one being vigilant and confrontational, asking Larry to stop sending him letters at such late hours, and where he works, explaining that he himself works in an office, yet again putting himself at a risk of Larry knowing his routine and when to break in. The second letter, on the other hand, is much more considerate and empathetic, with Thomas apologizing to Larry for asking why he's been lonely and encouraging him to speak more about himself, showing care and interest in Larry. Thomas, being an empathetic person, decides to write the second letter and plans to mail it tomorrow. As the next night commences and Thomas is fast asleep, he is yet again awakened by the loud knocks on his door, suddenly having a sense of unease, not knowing exactly why. Going to the door and finding yet another note, Larry explains that Thomas's question didn't offend him, continuing to respond to Larry's letter to how he has been faring. Larry ends the letter by asking Thomas a very personal question, if he's ever been in a relationship that ended, feeling that it was all of his fault, which makes Thomas feel uncomfortable. Nonetheless, Thomas goes to his office to write a response, with one of them refusing to answer the question about his personal life, and the other opening up that he's been in fact in a relationship which ended, causing him to feel guilty that it was his fault. In the second letter, Thomas continues that he's been feeling down lately as he's been unable to see his family due to the pandemic restrictions, ending the letter by giving Larry advice on how to deal with such situations after breakups. He explains it's best to look at the relationship as a whole instead of blaming himself, and to also accept responsibility and try to improve upon the mistakes and eventually move on. As Thomas heads to bed, he wakes up the next day feeling a strange sense of dread. He mails the letter and finishes work, with night soon commencing, with Thomas heading to bed once again to start the next day. Just as he's deep asleep, he hears faint sounds of someone telling him not to pretend to understand, which he doesn't know to be part of his dream or reality. The loud knocks are then heard again, with another note passed under the door. Thomas carefully picks up the note and observes in confusion that it's just a big smiley face with no other context. Just as Thomas turns to head back upstairs, back to his bed, he is startled by a large figure and a deformed face staring at him before the lights are cut and this figure disappearing. Having a flashlight nearby, Thomas looks for a fuse to put in the breaker and restore the lights. Finding a fuse and turning the lights back on, Thomas is attacked by Larry, or the deformed entity, whispering in a distorted voice that he's been trying to find someone else to talk to. That's when the lights turn off once more, with Thomas's fate being unclear. This unlocks the bad ending, which has several variations. Despite Thomas being understanding and supportive towards Larry, he ultimately decides to kill him, as he explains that Thomas is only being pretentious and doesn't really understand him, that he doesn't understand his loss. What loss is he exactly talking about, and how do we know for sure that Thomas was killed? All of this is soon unveiled in the following variations that are the result of Thomas writing differently and finding secret letters left over by Larry, a psychopathic individual who thinks people need to be understanding and go out of their ways to find the hidden and secretly stashed letters in different spots of the house, as otherwise for him the pen pal would not be truly an understanding friend worthy of life. If Thomas in one of his letters asks Larry not to send him letters late at night as he goes to work in the morning, Larry in response asks Thomas about his home security system, lying that he wants to find one for his own house, even though he can't easily search online for a suitable security system. This reveals how Larry only has one thing on his mind: to find a way inside Thomas's house, taking advantage of his empathy and kindness. Whether Thomas informs Larry about his home security system or not, it all ends to the same letter, with Larry asking about personal relationship breakups, with him breaking in and killing Thomas. Thomas deciding to be more confrontational leads to Larry becoming angry and breaking in, or Thomas deciding to be semi-confrontational leads to the same end with some variations. Larry writes in one of his letters that he's unemployed, but he's got a wonderful girlfriend who's been supporting him and letting him stay over, which turns into a subsequent strange letter by Larry informing Thomas that he's excited for the both of them to meet. Just as he's reading the letter, the TV turns on its own, reporting on a killer on the loose who's been leaving letters and notes as his calling cards before breaking into the house and killing the occupant.
Local residents of West Ice Splendor Boulevard were greatly disturbed this morning when yet another murder was found to have taken place in the neighborhood. This is the 7th victim in a series of killings who seems to be targeted at people of this neighborhood and the surrounding areas. On further investigation, several notes were uncovered inside the home of the victim, seeming to have been from the attacker, leading authorities to believe that this is the killer's calling card.
This causes Thomas to have a sense of dread, with a creepy person with a deformed face, which we know to be Larry, appearing behind his windows and observing him, having an everlasting smile wide enough to be ear to ear. It seems as if there's nothing Thomas can do to evade his doomed fate of falling victim to the sociopathic Larry, who is the killer reported on the TV, being on the loose, killing anyone it gets in contact with. However, there's something Thomas can do to escape this maniac and get on his good side in order to achieve the good ending. Larry seems to be a heartbroken man who asks Thomas if he's been in a breakup, holding himself responsible for the end of the relationship, directly portraying that it's Larry who wants to seek reassurance and advice for himself. This time, Thomas looks around in his house and in horror comes across crumpled up notes left around. These notes were left by Larry for Thomas to find in order to understand his situation better, as in his mind, his pen pal should know fully what happened and accept him for what he is, a psychopath. As without finding these letters, Larry would dismiss Thomas's support and friendliness as pretense and kill him. The first letter Thomas finds is written by Larry to someone called Laura. Laura and Larry seem to have a relationship, with Larry making a mistake as he mentions it himself, leading to Laura end the relationship and ignore his letters. Larry, being persistent and not understanding no means no and that he should move on, he continues that he misses Laura, wanting to hold her and missing her beautiful blue eyes, unveiling that blue is Larry's favorite color because of Laura's eye color. In the next letter, it's revealed that after many years of being together, Larry cheats on Laura with another woman, which leads to Laura breaking up, with Larry believing that it's all his fault. Despite knowing he's the one who's made the grave mistake, he doesn't stop writing to Laura, harassing her and not being considerate enough to let Laura go, consistently apologizing to her to the point of being creepy, portraying how he's having a mental breakdown that is keeping a big smile on his face, despite being sad inside. Despite Laura clearly not showing any interest, Larry keeps on writing and writing, with the final letter displaying that Laura moved away from her original house as she started being freaked out by Larry, which doesn't help much as Larry tracks her down and breaks into her house, waiting for her patiently to arrive. He mentions in his last letter to Laura in a threatening manner how it's been so long since he's seen her face, wanting to be back together even though she's already with another man, being in a relationship. Larry, being completely deluded and out of touch with reality, mentions how despite the new partner treating Laura very nicely, no one treats her better than himself, even though he cheated on her and doesn't respect her wishes and privacy of letting her move on and be happy, wanting to trap her and manipulate her, and those are the least of Laura's concerns. Ambushing Laura in her own house, having cut the lines so that Laura can't call the police, Larry, in a menacing tone, mentions how he has a wonderful smile to share with her, and this time intending to never let her go. This time, Thomas, fully understanding what a creep Larry is, who seemingly murdered Laura, still shows his support, advising Larry to take responsibility for his mistakes in the relationship and eventually move on past his mistakes and forgive himself. Larry sends a final letter thanking Thomas for caring for him and giving him such good advice, as Larry knows Thomas found and read his letters to Laura, knowing what he has done. Larry seems to empty his baggage and feel lighter, confessing to Thomas, taking responsibility for his mistakes and wanting badly to move on. He then advises Thomas to never stop smiling when he suddenly appears behind Thomas, before disappearing in the thin air and this time not cutting off the lights. A final note appears inside the house with just a big smiley face, with Thomas never hearing of Larry ever again, as if Larry never had existed. This also puts a stop to the murders in the neighborhood, with the case being closed unsolved, no one knowing what truly happened apart from the last survivor, Thomas. This unlocks the good ending, with Thomas living on with a strange experience of being pen pals with a ghost-like psychopath. What I'm going to explain now is mainly based on my own personal interpretation about who Larry is and what exactly happened. According to one of the notes left by Larry, he asks Thomas if he believes in ghosts before appearing behind him out of nowhere and cuts the lights off telepathically. Larry also has a deformed face, only slightly resembling a human face, with it mainly looking like a skull. This in a way suggests that Larry could be a supernatural entity, able to easily pass through walls, telepathically cut off the lights, and kill anyone he wishes in an instant. Larry was able to leave notes around Thomas's house with no difficulty and bypassed his home security system easily. A security system that Thomas suggests to be very good at securing the house. At the very end, Larry also mentions that he broke into Laura's house, holding care for eternity and having an everlasting smile, which he still has till now, never to be wiped off his face. But something Larry lacks is the ability to forgive himself and move on from a mistake that he made years ago, something that he seeks validation for in order to move on. That is why this entity goes door to door, trying to find a suitable candidate to help him in this matter. If the targeted person is supportive with no evidence of who Larry truly is, Larry inevitably kills them, but if they find the secretly stashed notes around the house, Larry appreciates their advice, gets his true validation, and lets the occupants live, or pen pals as he likes to call them. Larry seems to have ended Laura and his own life after the final letter to Laura, becoming a hostile spirit as the result, looking for validation. Laura seems to be also trapped with them, as through some letters, if Thomas compliments Larry's girlfriend, Larry suggests that they should both meet before ending his life. This could portray that despite Larry feeling guilty for cheating on Laura, he still lives with her in the afterlife and takes Thomas's soul to join them in there. Cheating on Laura and ending their relationship doesn't seem to be the only mistake that Larry talks about, but the major mistake he made is nothing but the fact that he took Laura's life. Unable to forgive himself even after death, forcing Laura to stay with him forever, as he mentioned, he would never let Laura go ever again. Therefore, a genuine advice from a targeted household or a pen pal, knowing Larry's full story, allows Larry to take responsibility for his misdeeds and move on, not only forgiving himself so that he can stop being a hostile spirit killing others, but to also allow Laura go, being finally free from Larry's confinement and curse, making Larry come to terms with his mistake and be more considerate. And that brings us to the end of the video, folks. If you enjoyed it as much as I did, make sure to stay tuned by hitting on the subscribe button and the notification bell. It's been your host Star, as always, and I will catch you on the next one. Take care.